So in case you've been living under a rock for the past forever, it feels like here on Booktube, A Court of Thorns and Roses is a series by Sarah J. Maas that's often marketed as a fantasy romance series. It was first published as a young adult book and has been moved over to adult since then. The past year or so, there's been some controversy about whether or not we should sell this book to children. And even though I'm not traditionally into just like a swoony romance for the sake of romance, I had to pick this thing up once they told me that it wasn't appropriate for children to buy, let alone classify it as young adult. This is the fantasy romance to beat out all fantasy romances on Booktube. I wanted to get this in as a Valentine's Day special. So this past week, I read not just The Court of Thorns and Roses, I also picked up A Court of Mist and Fury and A Court of Wings and Ruin. Real quick, these books, no joke. Look at how hefty they are. I'm coming to you after 2 days of sleeping it off to just give you my off-the-cuff thoughts and impressions. First and most surprisingly to me is I don't think I would consider this trilogy a romance trilogy. If I had to categorize this, I would say that it's walking the line between like a fairy tale fantasy and an epic fantasy, because there's a ton of allusions to different fairy tales and it's structured in a very fairy tale manner. But by the time you get to the Court of Wings and Ruin, we have gone into some epic battle, Lord of the Rings style crap in here. It is not to say I didn't enjoy it, but it is more to say like this isn't a romance. This isn't about these two people's relationship or them getting their own happily ever after or having kids or whatever. This has become the fate of the world, the fate of her family, the fate of all these people she knows and cares about. It's a very ensemble cast. I don't understand why people consistently categorize this series as a romance. There are, of course, some steamy scenes in these books. How could there not be with a length like this? But I definitely don't think the sex scenes are the majority of the story. A Court of Thorns and Roses was probably like a 4-star read from me. I thought it was a solid introduction. Sarah J. Maas has very descriptive writing, and that's both a good and a bad thing. I wasn't even sure I was going to be able to do this project at all when I started this book because the first 8 pages are just like descriptive filler. I pushed myself to get through it because I wanted to do this project so much. I don't know why those first 8 pages exist. We could have just started with her shooting and killing the wolf. We go over all those elements of the story ad nauseum later on. There is so much exposition between these 3 stories. I didn't necessarily mind the exposition later on, but here in the beginning in the setup, it was excruciating. If I had to describe this book to someone, I would tell them that it's a cross between Beauty and the Beast and a traditional Tamlin story. The Beauty and the Beast part is self-evident. Farah, our main character, gets taken by a Fae High Lord whose name is Tamlin back to the fairy court and has to stay there to fulfill some kind of life debt thing. If you're unfamiliar with the legend of Tamlin, which the Fae in this story is literally named after him, it's a myth about this prince, Tamlin, who spent a lot of time in the fairy realm and was ethereal and beautiful, and he ends up sleeping with a maiden and getting her pregnant, and then he is able to reveal to her after this that like he's been abducted by the fairy queen and they're going to sacrifice him if she doesn't come and claim him and save him from this. And the back half of Court of Thorns and Roses is all about how Farah has to go back into the fairyland, take Tamlin back from like this high fae queen lady. One thing that's a little bit jarring to me about this that makes it 4 stars versus 5 stars is I kind of feel like it's 2 separate books. Book 1 is Beauty and the Beast and her being trapped in the castle and getting to know Tamlin and Tamlin getting to know her. Sent back to the human world. When she comes back to the fairy world the second time and has to complete those like 3 tasks in the riddle to save everyone, it's a very different story tonally and pacing and structure wise. And it's really weird to have the 2 of them matched together into one book. I think ultimately it ends up working. I don't think I'd necessarily split it. It perpetually struck me as odd, and I had to keep reminding myself that I was reading the same book. Tamlin and Farah have remarkably little chemistry as far as I'm concerned in this book. Farah's quest to save him and claiming that she loved him and doing all the tasks felt very Romeo and Juliet to me, in that she was Romeo and was in love with the idea of love and willing to go to extremes for someone she did not know and who was probably not well suited for her in the long run. And because this is so Romeo and Juliet, this is so fairy tale wrapped, and Farah is so emotional and high strung, I can see why this book was originally marketed for young adults. And I still think this is a great book for young adults. Now, if you're looking to protect your kids from like any sexual anything, then obviously the series is not for you, because there are quite a few steamy scenes in it. But as far as like the overall treatment of sex goes in these books, generally speaking, it feels like consent, how important sex is or isn't in someone's life, all that kind of stuff is pretty well balanced and handled. There is one questionable scene, I think, in this book where they have like this spring fairy festival going on. Steamy scenes is part of the fairy festival rite, and I do think talking about like rituals that involve steamy times might be a little bit for teens to handle. A couple of quibbles I have with this Court of Thorns and Roses, major spoilers, FYI. So one thing I didn't like is I thought when Farah had to kill those 3 fae, we were going to get her maid and the 2 children the maid was protecting. And I was like,
it's going to be a heartbreak. That's going to be some drama.
So when it was just like Rando 1 and Rando 2 and Tamlin, I was kind of disappointed. I also don't understand about Tamlin's Heart of Stone. It's not a fairy lore thing. That's not a thing any of the other fae have. That's not at all related to his power set that like makes him special and unique. And it never comes into play again. And also it feels very chance and coincidental that that's how Farah interpreted those conversations and speeches. Needed a lot more from that to be more than just convenience. I didn't hate it. It didn't destroy the story for me. It just felt though like either there was stuff on the cutting room floor or like she got tired and just wanted to be done. Stoneheart didn't love that part. Going into A Court of Mist and Fury, this was a 5-star read for me. It is absolutely excellent. First of all, I love this story because it took some of the red flags in Tamlin and some of the trauma that he experienced and warped it to make him like an abusive and terrible person that Farah has to escape from. And I loved that. Of the 2 characters that are pretty well fleshed out in the first book, one being Rhysand and the other one being Lucian, we really get to explore who Rhysand is and where he comes from and why he is the way he is. We never try to change Rhysand or change Farah. It's really about the 2 of them having conversations and getting to know one another. And of course, I love like a healing story in general. Farah is really scarred from her trials under the mountain, and it takes her a long time to work through everything that she feels and thinks about it. And I appreciate that this book took that time. I really felt like the length here built it out and was worthwhile. Some minor quibbles I have about this book, even at 5 stars. The whole mates thing like is not working for me in this series. Don't feel like the mate bonds are that strong or like strong enough to be interesting and compelling or to even stand out and like make themselves different than normal human relationships. And because of that, I don't understand why they were included, except like hitting a checklist of things that people like in these kinds of stories. Also, I think how Lucian is treated in this particular story, this character assassination, if this is really who Lucian is and how he's going to be portrayed, which he's portrayed consistently in this one and this one, the main thing that's different is in Court of Thorns and Roses, where he has more of a spine and more of an attitude. I liked him in the first book, and I don't like him in the second and third book, and I don't understand why his character changed. And if he's always been like he is in these books, then why was he so different in the first book? And then lastly, talking about the Court of Wings and Ruin, this book is way too long. I'll give this a solid 3-star read. And if you were asking me if I would read it again or if I would recommend it, the answer is a hard pass. I love the second book, 5 stars, totally should read the second book. You have to read the first book for the second book to hit. I don't think you need this book. I know this is the thrilling conclusion to the stuff that's been leading up in 1 and 2. The truth of the matter is that there's a lot of stuff in this book I just don't care about. Like every detail of the final battle just doesn't have to be written down in there, and I didn't care for that. The whole like the dad came at the end to save his children thing came out of nowhere and does not match the dad that we learned about in the first and second book. The solution here for the cauldron, which was like more of the same as in the second book, except it didn't work in the second book and for some reason it works here in this book. And I hated at the end that both Rhysand and the dragon lady died and came back. Rhysand I know has to live because this is categorized as a romance. So I know there's a happily ever after, which means he survives. The dragon lady should have just stayed dead. The fact that she also survives was too much. And I was legit mad that I had read this book and got this far. Everyone was fine. And there was no death at all. Because there's like a lot of angst and uncertainty. And I'm into it because it feels like there are stakes and like something bad could happen to these characters or someone we care about could actually die. But then we get to the end of the book and everybody is alive and well and living their best lives. And it's like,
why did I go through all that? None of this actually mattered at all, did it?
There's enough in here that's cute and fun and flirty and puzzle solving that like I want to like this book. I want to be invested and I want to read it, which is where the 3 stars comes in versus the 2 stars. But there's also just so much fluff and filler. And the other thing is reading all 3 of these books back to back, there's a lot of repetition. We hit the same beats about certain people's backstories over and over again. And I learn about people's backstories that I just don't care about and don't matter. And maybe they matter to like spin-off series or later down the line or for world building or whatever. Don't just like make a chunker of a book for the sake of it. So that's going to be The Court of Thorns and Roses. Overall, I'm surprisingly glad that I read this book. It feels like such a standard book series. I'm shocked it's made so many waves. Like if I had to describe this book, I wouldn't even call it like the fairy smut book or the booktube romance. I'd call it like the girlies Lord of the Rings. It's not quite one ring to rule them all, but there is definitely like the cauldron is the one ring element and Farah is Frodo and the King of Hyperion is like Sauron. There's just a lot of comparisons you can make. It doesn't 100% one-for-one fit, but it's very similar. And the same like epic thematic togetherness and friendship, camaraderie, the character building, all that stuff is awesome. And I think there's a lot of potential for fun side romances. I'm not sure that I'm in on all of the pairings that this particular 3rd book is setting us up for. Some of them feel like missed opportunities or like breakups I'm hoping will happen later down the line. But it is interesting and I could see why other people got really into this world and these characters and wanted to keep reading about them. That's A Court of Thorns and Roses, Booktube's most epic fantasy romance for Valentine's Day. Have you guys read this series? And if so, did you like it or not? Let me know in those comments down below. And if you have got this far in the video, leave me a little heart emoji. Thank you for watching, and as always, keep reading. Bye!